Welcome to Draft Deeper on the No Ceilings NBA podcast feed. Thank you so much for joining us for this first episode post 2023 NBA draft. Maxwell Baumbach is with me as my co-host. Maxwell, we're finally on the other side of the 2023 NBA draft. We get to talk about results, not just predictions and projections, right? This is going to be a fun podcast. How are you feeling post draft?
I'm doing great. And we talked about this quite a bit internally, how your perception and projection can change based on where a guy landed in the draft. So it's really exciting to be on this side of the coin now. I know we're all fired up to get into some of the 2024 stuff too. Like the group chat today talking about the U19 games and whatever. Yep. Everybody's fired up and ready to go. But we got to dissect 2023 first, and we're going to go through and kind of look at some of our favorite picks throughout the night.
I love you guys that are absolutely eager to tear through 2024 draft film as we enter this preseason process. I need a little bit of time away from just pure draft stuff. I usually like to take a little bit of a break and focus on reflecting on the current draft class and how it turned out, how these guys actually fit with their NBA teams, getting the preview and talk about a lot of the summer league stuff, free agency. So I like to actually focus on a lot of the NBA aspects that are coming into play. But as you mentioned, there will be plenty of time to talk 2024 draft preseason. You and I, as I'm sure, going to go heavy on that stuff, heavier than I think we usually would, because now that you're here with Draft Deeper and you've been here as a full-time co-host, we get to pick apart your favorite column to write the entire year, which is all of the pieces you do in the series of No Stone Unturned. So we will have plenty of time to unpack that stuff. But as you mentioned, we need to talk about what the heck happened in the 2023 NBA draft. So something that we wanted to do, obviously on Draft Deeper, we want to give as much of a complete draft recap as we can, but we also don't feel the need to rehash every single little thing, because the best thing about No Ceilings that we have at this collective is everyone has different opinions. Everyone has different ways of viewing the draft and evaluating these prospects. So it will be awesome to hear about each of these picks through different lenses, which is why we can sort of give some of our favorite selections from the 2023 NBA draft, some of our favorite fits. And then I'm certain the audience will be hearing a myriad of different recollections and recounts and evaluations from how this draft turned out through each of our shows, right? No Ceilings NBA draft flagship show with the Tylers and the Draft Act crew and Nick and Paige, and everyone's going to get a chance to react to what happened. So let's jump in here. What we decided to do is we're going to go through the draft in groups of 5. So we're going to go picks 1 through 5, 6 through 10, and onwards through the second round. And we're just going to stop and we're going to give our favorite selection within that range of 5 picks in terms of how we feel the draft turned out for a specific team and or a specific player. So starting at the top, obviously, we're talking about the San Antonio Spurs with Victor Wembanyama. The Charlotte Hornets took Brandon Miller at 2nd overall. The Trailblazers took Scoot Henderson at 3rd overall. The Rockets got Amen Thompson at 4. And the Pistons went back-to-back Thompson twins, and they got Asar at number 5. So, Maxwell, I'll start with you. That's kind of how we'll go back and forth on this. Out of those top 5 picks, which one was your favorite selection?
So is it too early to do the cornball? Well, everyone's already talked about the other guy, so I'm going to zig where everybody else zags thing. But I kind of want to talk about Amen Thompson with the Houston Rockets.
Okay.
Because look, the Victor coverage has been wall to wall. Everyone has already beaten to death the Brandon Miller, Scoot Henderson thing. There was a clip today of someone posting Brandon Miller's high school film to be he played bums in high school. It's dude, he just played in the SEC. What are we doing here?
Right.
So I want to talk about Amen because I'm very excited. And I think this is the ideal developmental context for him. You're going to have a coach that holds him accountable. You have a team that's sort of in the middle of a culture reset, and people forget too, they're getting a bunch of Celtics assistants in there now too, that were with Ime previously. So it's not just one guy. You're getting a lot of that cultural infrastructure that was in place in Boston prior to this too. So that's really good. I still believe in Jabari Smith with my whole heart.
Sure.
And I think that he's going to open up some really interesting things with him. He's going to make Jalen Green's life a whole lot easier on both sides of the ball. Let him play sort of a more natural role offensively, take it a little bit easier on defense. And the 2-man game with Şengün is going to be potentially outrageous. They're going to have 2 of the most creative passers in the league on the floor together quite a bit. The transition game that they can play with Tar East and the defensive playmaking, like there's a lot to like. And that's before we get to one of my other favorite picks in the draft later with the Houston Rockets. But I think this is a great situation for him. I think this is the perfect place for him to just unlock everything he could be.
I'm going to actually save, now that you gave that teaser, I will save some Houston Rockets discussion until we get to that other selection when we get into that range. So I will just go ahead with my favorite pick in this range, which was the Portland Trailblazers sticking to their guns and taking Scoot Henderson, third overall. The reason why I'm saying that is, look, the Trailblazers could have absolutely traded this pick away, right? We talked about multiple trade scenarios that could have possibly been in play here on Draft Deeper for players like at the time, Jaylen Brown was obviously a hot point of discussion because of how the Celtics ultimately bowed out of the playoffs. There was a lot of buzz about guys like OG Anunoby possibly being available. Paul George's name is still absolutely in play in trade circles. And one of the things I wanted to do when we finally found out the order of the lottery was go through some scenarios and questions surrounding those top 4 teams, right? What could actually be in play? And the biggest thing around Portland was, what could the number 3 pick actually be flipped to in order to bring back potential star value and or positive return on the wing? And in walking through all those trades, Maxwell, we looked at each one of them and we said either Portland's giving up too much to bring in an expiring or depreciating asset, or the one way or another, the return's just not ultimately going to be what Portland would want it to be. Either they're giving up too much or they're not bringing in enough to ultimately replace what was going out the door. So it's not just the number 3 pick. It was, you're giving up the number 3 pick, plus you're trying to make salaries work because of where everyone's at in the current tax situation. So it's the number 3 pick plus an Anthony Simons, or you're trying to match up other smaller contracts to get to a medium-sized contract because it's really Anthony Simons, Yusuf Nurkic, and that's kind of the bulk of what's on the roster to trade, unless they're also willing to part with Shane Sharp, which if you're giving up a number 3 pick and Simons and Sharp, now you're just getting into, well, you're quite literally letting the entire future walk away from you in order to appease Damian Lillard. And I just, under no circumstance, thought that was a smart move to make. Clearly, the organization didn't think that was smart either, which is why they held on to number 3. And if you're going to draft a number 3 and Victor Wembanyama and Brandon Miller are off the board, you're going to take Scoot Henderson because the drop-off after those guys, in my opinion, was pretty significant. And that's coming from my perspective, right? Given the fallout from Cam Whitmore, I know we're going to get into him and talk about him, but given a lot of those potential concerns, I'm not the biggest Amen Thompson fan. Then you're getting into, how do one of those forwards like Jarris Walker, Taylor Hendricks fit? Do they justify value in terms of being taken in number 3? And you talk yourself into all of these scenarios that ultimately just aren't realistic because Scoot Henderson is a franchise changer. Scoot Henderson is that leader at the point guard position. He is the player who you can legitimately build a team around to contend, with him being your first or your second option, ideally probably your second option. You want to get one of those bigger wings to carry more of the load on both sides of the ball, but Scoot Henderson being the player who can man the offense, facilitate, score when needed. I think the jump shot's going to be perfectly fine. To me, there really aren't too many holes in his game that you would look at him and say, yeah, he's not worth one of the top 3 picks in this draft. They got one of the best players available, and kudos to them, because now, whether this franchise keeps Damian Lillard and they're just going with this incredible backcourt where they can essentially have 2 top offensive options on the floor at any given time, maybe they move on from an Anthony Simons and look to trade him for other pieces, or they just trade Damian Lillard and they finally embrace going with the rebuild and they choose to have, that trio. You can even play Scoot Henderson, Anthony Simons, and Shane Sharp in time. I believe all 3 of those guys can be on the floor together. So they have a bunch of directions they can take as a franchise, but they aren't handcuffed in any way because they traded their future away to try and appease Dame in the short term. And again, any of those guys, they're either on expiring deals or they have options in play that could make them free agents after a year or so anyway. So to me, you don't trade that much future value for one of those guys. So I'm glad that they ultimately stuck and made that pick. That leads us to the second group, which would be at pick 6, the Orlando Magic took Anthony Black. At number 7, this was actually a trade in between the Pacers and the Wizards. So ultimately, Bilal Coulibaly went to the Washington Wizards. Jarris Walker went to the Indiana Pacers. Taylor Hendricks was selected at number 9 to the Utah Jazz. And then Cason Wallace was a selection of the Thunder, who actually traded up with Dallas in another. So we saw 2 trades inside the top 10 on draft night. It certainly surprised us on our stream. Maxwell, out of that group of picks, which one was your favorite?
Yeah, I'm gonna go Jarris and pair it with the shenanigans that went around it, right? Like
Okay.
they did the hold 'em hostage move where they take Koulibaly, and people weren't quite sure what the trade up situation was gonna be. If it was gonna be the Wizards trading up, if it was possibly Utah that was gonna be trading up. But yeah, you get a bonus draft pick, you move back one spot, and you get a guy that fills a team need. Jarris is strong as a tank. He's going to rebound. He's going to give him some real toughness and size and length in Indiana that hadn't been there before. And he's another playmaker on the court because as much as I love Tyrese Haliburton, as much as I want Tyrese Haliburton to have the ball, there needs to be playmaking that comes outside of the guard spot on that roster. Yep. Like you can't just have him and Nembhard be the only guys at table set. And like even Duarte was a guy like back in college would throw some like wild passes. That's never been Ben Matherin's cup of tea, even though he's gotten better with it. Miles Turner's not like a decision maker. So getting a guy like Jarris in there who not only ticks a lot of boxes for you, but is going to be able to play next to a stretch 5 that's going to space out the floor for him and allow him to really attack downhill, whether it's as a handoff guy, a roll man, whatever the role is, it's going to be kind of an ideal fit for him. And that was something that we had discussed off the air. Is like, is Jarris going to require a more narrow fit than people might realize? And now, like, we don't have to worry about that. He's in an ideal fit situation. There is plenty of shooting around him. So even if that takes a while to get there, he's still going to be able to do his thing and make a real impact. And now defensively, similar to another team in the same range, like the amount of just rim protection is outrageous that you're getting out of that 4-5 spot. So I liked Jarris a lot here, especially with getting the extra value and the bonus pick out of it too.
Exactly. That's kind of something that I'm writing about for NoCeilingsNBA.com. Spoiler alert, Jarris Walker was also one of my favorite picks. He's not who I will talk about here, but just to sort of add to what Maxwell was talking about, something big that I was calling out on our draft night stream was this philosophy to where when you come into the draft and you have a lottery selection, the majority of the time, people like us in the media or other scouts or other executives always want to have these discussions, be it on the record or off the record, of let's mock players to these teams based on how they can possibly turn weaknesses into strengths and help this team ultimately rebound and add value in the short term. And while we love to talk about those types of scenarios, the reality is, and Maxwell and I actually talk about this all the time, rookies do not lend themselves to winning a ton of games right out of the gate. So sometimes the best way to actually approach the draft is to select players who best fit your system and play to your strengths. And Jarris Walker does that with the Indiana Pacers, right? As you mentioned, his connective ability as a playmaker in half-court settings within the offense, you know, him acting out of a short roll and being a playmaker there, him getting in certain post-up situations of being someone who can pass out of the post. You talk about how he fits in with this team defensively in terms of being a playmaker. The Indiana Pacers weren't the best team defensively last year in terms of just playing one-on-one defense and keeping guys and restraining them from getting to their spots, but they were active in making plays on the ball and getting out in transition. That's what Jarris did a lot for Houston. You're not asking him to be this immediate one-on-one ball stopper. You're just asking him to do a lot of what he already knows how to do defensively. So on both sides, Jarris has ways in which he can just come in and complement the game while also having all of the upside that Maxwell talked about as far as how he can ultimately round out the rest of his game. So I love that selection. I have to say, though, that my favorite pick comes obviously in the other half of that deal. So the Washington Wizards getting Bilal. I mean, Maxwell, you know that I've talked about this guy too much. And I'm sure everyone in the audience is probably like, Nate, you really need to stop talking about Bilal at some point. Like, we kind of get all the points you've been trying to make for months. But I do want to say, with the Washington Wizards taking a swing on him, right? So they stripped down the foundation of this team. This team went from Bradley Beal, Kristaps Porzingis, and Kyle Kuzma to all three of those guys being out the door, either electing to leave or being traded away. So now you have guys like Tyus Jones and Jordan Poole coming in the backcourt. You still have some carryovers like Denny Avdia. Hopefully you're going to get more development out of someone like Johnny Davis. Next year you have like Daniel Gafford in the center spot. So you have some fun young pieces, but you also don't necessarily have anyone who you're looking to commandeer the franchise into a top 6 playoff spot right out of the gate next year. You know this team's going to be bad. You know they're probably going to be back near the top of the lottery again next year. So why not take a swing on one of the highest upside prospects left available in the field? And Bilal Coulibaly, for all that he may very well prove to be, nothing more than a role player who's like a top 8, top 9 guy. You bring him in off the bench to be a change of pace, to guard multiple positions because he's not bringing you the necessary offensive value. What I saw and what I wrote about from his play in Espoir was that this guy actually does have some more on the ball juice than we initially anticipated, more than he got to show with Victor and Mets 92. Someone who has some fluidity and creativity in the pick and roll, someone who is a deadly downhill scorer and an attacker at the rim, bringing the ball out of certain ball screen situations or getting the ability to drive towards the basket, off of a free lane, right? He has the ability to put pressure on the rim in ways that some of these other guys in this range don't have the ability to do so. And then you throw in all the complementary defensive aspects. You throw in how he's growing as a secondary and tertiary playmaker. The pick and roll game, like I mentioned, is improving. And guys at his size, 6'8", 7'2" wingspan, his feet, his mobility, his fluidity, these guys just don't come around as often as we'd like to admit in the draft. And they're all reasons why he ultimately rose up draft boards and teams felt like they had to move inside the top 10 or make moves inside the top 10 to ultimately get a chance to take him, which is why Washington ended up trading up, essentially going up a spot, giving up 2 second-round picks to do it. But in turn, they're getting a guy that can, who knows, potentially be the face of the franchise one day if his development pans out correctly. Now, I will say one thing, Maxwell, and I'm curious to get your take on this before we move to the next group of guys. I have a little bit of hesitancy in terms of this perfect long-term fit between Coulibaly and the Washington Wizards because of how high he was taken. There is a chance that fans expect too much of him out of the gate and that this could pan out to be a poorer situation than you and I would want it to be within the first few years because maybe a little bit too much is put on his plate early rather than giving him the type of patience he's going to need to keep developing. Because as much as I like to get excited about him, Maxwell, he's far from a finished product. So do you have any sort of thoughts to throw in there?
No, I agree with that. I think there's some truth to that. And I think that's true of like every team picking the lottery in general. Like Rucker put together that thread of like, here's like every player taken at like 10, 11, 12, 13. And like those guys generally are not great. Like you'll have like 2 or 3 all-stars, 2 or 3 starters, and then a bunch of guys that like end up just kind of not being good. Like it's a much harder to hit on guys at any point in the draft than people would like to believe. So that is a real possibility. I think the fact that they're gonna have a guy like Jordan Poole in there is gonna like alleviate a lot. That it's like, well, all right, well, you have like one guy who's gonna be like, look, I'm the guy.
Jordan Poole can at least average like 26, 27 points if he needs to on high volume. So
yeah, he's going to be the guy running the offense. So like, it's not like they're giving Bilal the ball and like rolling it out to him, being like, go score. Like he's going to be able to assume a little bit of a role out of the gate, which I think is good for him.
Fair enough, and I would agree with that. And that's the hope with what his development looks like with the Washington Wizards. So moving on to picks 11 through 15. The Orlando Magic, boy, surprise of the night by a lot of people. Not necessarily for us at No Ceilings, but for a lot of analysts and scouts out there. They did not expect Jet Howard to go 11th overall to the Orlando Magic. That's where he went. The Mavericks traded back to 12 in that deal with the Thunder. They ended up taking Derek Lively. The Toronto Raptors got Grady Dick at 13. To round out the lottery, Jordan Hawkins went to the New Orleans Pelicans at 14. And then Kobe Buffkin actually slid a little further than people were initially anticipating. He went 15th to the Atlanta Hawks. So, Maxwell, out of that group, which one was your favorite selection?
I love the Derek Lively pick. It's one that I feel like I made a million times in different mock drafts over the last couple of months. And the fact they were able to trade back and still get him, I love it. Like, this is a team that we've talked about a million times. Very deficient in terms of their athleticism, getting really thin and kind of old at the center position. And no one that's just like real bouncy, long, athletic. Like, really anywhere on the roster. Like, that's just not the kind of guy that they have. So by getting Derek Lively, you're getting someone who brings a lot of scheme versatility. And playing alongside stars like Kyrie and Luka is a guy who's going to be content not playing with the ball, right? Like, this is not a guy. You can say a lot of things about his Duke film. I would not call Derek Lively over assertive offensively. If anything, it's the opposite issue. So
Sure.
him in a place like Dallas is going to be a really clean fit on the offensive side of the ball. I like his passing a lot. It's something I've spoken about quite a bit. I'm a believer in him making decisions and orchestrating a little bit of offense, becoming a short roll guy in time. If the really exciting stuff comes around, awesome. Like if he's draining threes at some point, whatever. But like, I don't know. When I saw him at the McDonald's game, it was just so clear that it's like there just aren't a lot of dudes that are this big and move like this guy. And the fact that he displayed such good defensive technique, you're going to be able to roll him out in whatever kind of coverage you want to run on that side of the floor. He's going to finish at a high level, even if there's not a ton else there. Like at 12, you're getting good value, even if like he is the guy you saw at Duke and nothing more. Like even if that just is what he is, it's a good pick considering what the team is and where they're headed. But he does still have that upside. And you can't deny it. And if it hits, like you finally got another young, like potential actual star that you could pair with Luka if all the good stuff comes around.
Are you confident in some of that upside hitting? Because I think that's maybe the selling point that wasn't sold as aggressively when a lot of Mavericks fans are like watching people talk about the draft, for example, or they have the TV broadcasts on and they're not necessarily bringing up these aspects in relation to his upside. They're talking about the player who he is now, which fills a need for the Mavericks that was clear as day. They needed to address the defensive side of the ball. But you and I are actually excited about these factors in relation to his upside. And I actually am confident that some of them are going to pan out in, if not a significant way, a meaningful enough way to where they're able to pop in certain situations for the Mavericks. I'm assuming you feel the same way because you also had a pretty high grade on Derek Lively like I did.
Yeah, I had him 10, and I do think some of it's going to come around. I'm a little bit more bullish on like the passing side of things. Like I've always just really seen it with him in terms of how he reads the floor. And like, I think if you're getting somebody that can protect the rim the way that he does, move the way that he does, hang on an island the way that he does, and then just finish and pass, like that's already like one of the better centers in the NBA. So that's what I really buy. The jump shot, I'm kind of like, meh, like the fact that you were not taking some real open unguarded looks at Duke this year has me a little hesitant. I know he makes some workouts. I know he made him in high school. I wrote about it being part of the reason why I still liked him in college after his slow start this year. But yeah, I'm not like totally convinced that gets there.
That's fair. That's a completely fair take to have. And I agree with you on the Lively pick. I thought it was great by Dallas to be able to move off of a contract, right, and bring back some value and essentially getting your guy at 12, moving back, figuring that out with Oklahoma City. They ended up going up and getting their guy, Cason Wallace, which I'm actually a little surprised you didn't pick Cason Wallace as your guy.
I know, I love
you. You love Cason Wallace so much. But I'm actually glad you went a different direction and talked about the Jarris pick because I also thought that was a great pick. My favorite pick in this range was Jett Howard to the Magic by far. And I was on air for the No Ceilings NBA Live Draft Show, so I actually got to discuss the pick as it happened. There were so many people who thought that Grady Dick was going to be the selection for Orlando at 11, given the fact that they went Anthony Black at 6. So you're bringing in another potential non-shooter to pair in the backcourt with Markelle Fultz and Jalen Suggs, two guys who also aren't offering shooting at a high volume and high efficiency. So you need that spacing to come from somewhere. With Paolo and Franz commanding a lot of the ball, and now you're bringing in Anthony Black. You still have Markelle Fultz there. Somebody on the court needs to be able to shoot, so you knew that was going to be a concern that they addressed with their second lottery selection. Was it going to be Grady Dick? Was it even going to be someone like Jordan Hawkins skyrocketing all the way up to 11? I know Gavoni had Hawkins mocked a few times to Orlando at 11, like right after the lottery concluded. So we thought both of those names are going to be in play. And Jett Howard, because of those double ankle injuries, because of some concerns around his defense and the lack of rebounding and the lack of elite at rim finishing, he slid down draft boards from where he was earlier in the year, which was like a consensus top 10 player through the first half of the season. For us in No Ceilings, Maxwell, I think it was like 7-8, somewhere like on our draft boards at different points. So we were all very high on him. I think a lot of us still remained high on him in terms of having him in the lottery. Albert even finished with him inside of his top 5. So like No Ceilings kind of stuck to their guns.
It was so funny. I had one friend who was like, oh, like I want to watch your draft show. This is like on Saturday, like just hanging out, whatever.
Yep.
And he's just getting back into the NBA. He's more of a football guy. And he was like, everything I've listened to killed this Jet Howard pick, and you guys loved it. Like he was like, this is the only place I've seen that's like, way to go, Orlando. They got their guy. Like we're the only people, it feels like, that are all about this pick. But I loved it. I thought it was great. Like you've got to consider the player he was before those injuries. And that guy
Yep.
is like a guy you reasonably take in the top 10.
So what Jet Howard brings to the table is what Grady Dick and Jordan Hawkins would also bring to the table, which is shooting, right? We know that he's going to be a spot up guy. You can actually have Jet Howard work off screens. You can get him off the move. He can relocate. He moves well without the basketball. So you get a lot of those things you're getting with those other two guys, and you're getting someone who can shoot 40+% from 3-point range on higher volume. Even though there are some other issues in relation to his game, what those two other guys don't provide for you, Maxwell, if his upside comes around, is the ball handling and the passing. Jet Howard is a legitimate ball handler and space creator on the perimeter. He can get his own shot off from 3-point range, or even coming off of a screen. He can get to a step back in the mid-range. His passing vision is very underrated, especially coming out of certain pick and roll actions, even working off a DHO from a passing standpoint, right? If too much gravity and defensive attention is brought onto him, he can find a roll man for a lob. He can kick the ball else to where it needs to go. He can swing it back around. I'm buying those two things fitting really well within Orlando's offense, because it means that he can act as a tertiary creator on the floor, right? As a third option, as a fourth option, he can take pressure off of Paolo and Franz, or even Fultz or Suggs to a certain extent, when they feel like they have to do every single thing for this team in terms of scoring or setting someone else up for a look. Jet Howard can also do those things himself, which is why I think he better complements those guys. He fits into the style of play that Orlando wants to operate under. The amount of actions that this team can run now offensively, because all of these guys are willing movers without the basketball. They can all cut, they can all pass, they can all handle it. So I just think what Jet Howard brings to the table, now you're starting to build a lineup offensively closer to what Oklahoma City's been doing with the Thunder, and it just makes the Magic that much more of an exciting team on the come up in the Eastern Conference. I think they're going to challenge for a play-in/playoff spot. I firmly believe that. We think they're going to add some more veteran pieces in free agency. Maybe they're even in position to make a trade for somebody we don't fully think is on the table yet, or we haven't fully heard in trade talks. Maybe Orlando's able to jump in there because of future draft assets, some of the other young guys they have on the roster. I think Orlando's in position regardless to make a jump in the standings, and I think Jet Howard's going to have something to do with it.
Yeah.
Given the options, Maxwell, that you could have had at that spot as far as shooters, like you love the pick in terms of him versus those two other guys, right? Like I
do. I had Jet Howard. I had Jet higher than both of those guys. So for me, it's like, if you take a shooter in that range, Jet was the guy to take.
Don't you kind of just want somebody at that size who can also handle the ball and pass more so than just like a standard spot up guy?
For sure. And that's like the thing with Hawkins. Like I was texting you, like when I was doing my Hawkins deep dive, and like I was like, the pick and roll film is like a little terrifying. Like some of the open reads that he would miss. Like there was one possession that like is just burned into my brain where he missed Caravan twice. Like he missed Caravan on a pop, and then Caravan cut and was wide open, and he missed him again. And like both times it was a very, very like right in front of his face type of thing, and he didn't get it done. And like, I'm a little more bullish on Grady Dick as a decision maker. I thought he got a lot better in the last year. Like I did not like him at all in that respect coming out of high school, but like he doesn't have like the rhythm and rock with the ball that a guy like a Jet Howard does. Like he's not going to put it on the floor and even like create like a mid-range look really. And I think like, I know he was really good in transition, but he had some ugly misses off of movement. Like I'm just not convinced that he's like a real movement shooter as much as just like a bona fide floor spacer. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like I think Grady Dick's going to play in the NBA for a long time, but I just like the dynamism that Jet brings, both in terms of what he can do with the ball to like set up himself and set up teammates, and just as a movement shooter. I think he's a lot further ahead. He's not Hawkins, but like he's bigger than Hawkins. He's a way better decision maker. So
don't you think the rim finishing is going to improve as well, like to a certain extent? Maybe not take like a drastic leap, but I do think it's going to improve at least slightly, because that spacing for Orlando, I don't think it's going to be as cramped as people think it is, because they
Mhm.
they do kind of like to play a 5-out style at times, right? Like Wendell Carter will space the floor for this team. He's comfortable playing out, at the free throw line or beyond the 3-point line. They'll go with a guy like Bol at the 5 who can space the floor. I imagine they're going to continue to run more creative lineups with like Powell at the 5, who clearly won't be clogging the paint, for someone like Jet Howard. If he's coming off of screen and he has a lane to get downhill towards the basket, more likely than not, he's probably going to have one man to beat to get there. And I do trust him as that sort of finisher around the basket. I don't think he's going to need to take as many of these attempts as he could have, either, paint's clogged in traffic, or there's so much attention on him that the defense is consistently focused on walling off Jet Howard to get to the basket, as opposed to some of these other guys they have on the team. I think those two problems were what set up a lot of his struggles at Michigan. And I think a 6'7" guy is going to be able to finish better at the basket if he has easier looks to at the end of the day. That's just my opinion. Again, not like a drastic leap, but I do think some of it's going to be easier for him just because of how Orlando can space and operate with more movement and better players overall.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I love that pick.
All right, so we're going to take one quick break. When we come back, we are going to go through the rest of the first round and our favorite selections within that first round. All right, and we are back. So Maxwell, we are up 16 through 20. At 16, the Utah Jazz took Keontae George. At 17, the Los Angeles Lakers took Jalen Hood-Schifino. At 18, the Miami Heat took Jaime Jaquez. At 19, the Golden State Warriors took Brandon Podziemski. And at 20, the Houston Rockets took Cam Whitmore. So you already alluded to it, but what was your favorite selection within this group?
Yeah, it's Cam Whitmore. I think look, I'm really confused, to be honest. Maybe we got some smoke blown our way, right?
Sure.
But it seemed like there weren't a lot of reports about like him being bad in workouts until like the week of the draft. Like we'd had some pretty firm, like solidly sourced, like he looked good in workouts, and I've continued to hear that from people with teams. Like you're like, yeah, no, I still don't get it. Like I don't get the whole like he didn't look good thing. So maybe he had some bad workouts. I understand people were mad about the interviews, and that could always be a thing. And sometimes guys don't want to play for certain teams. They might not give it their all when they're working out or interviewing with the team.
Sure.
It's like the my player mode in 2K when like you'd get interviewed by a team and they'd be like, what's your goal in the NBA? And it's like, I want to like win the championship, or like I want to commit crimes. Like it's like sometimes you purposely give teams the wrong answer just so that you can be like, all right, like I don't really want to play here.
Sure.
So that could be part of it. It's hard to know, but here's the bottom line. I had this guy 4th on my board. You got him at 20th.
Yep.
That's a win. This is a guy who's one of the youngest players in the draft. He is a freight train going to the basket, tremendous multi-positional defender, lights out 3-point shooter. Everything with a knee, based on what Gavoni was saying, was that like it sounds like it might not be an issue till later in his career, which like great, glad I know that now. Like we can get a little bit in front of it, manage it a little bit, find the best way to deal with it. I'm still taking that guy like top 10 every single time, let alone at 20. Like if you were like his knee is, hanging on by a thread, I'm still taking him at 20. If I'm the Houston Rockets, if this guy's got a pulse and he's on the board, I'm taking him at 20. So I love that pick. You still got to find your guy if you're the Rockets. Like you don't want to be one of those teams that like you get a bunch of guys that are okay. Like this is the problem the Chicago Bulls had, where it's like you got Lauri Markkanen and you got Wendell Carter, and like they were all just fine. And then now Lauri's a little more than just fine now, unfortunately, after they've traded him. But the worst thing that can happen is like you're just stuck in that purgatory of being like okay and not quite bad enough to get a star. So like I love just going for another star here.
So I completely agree about the value of the pick. Like if you can get Cam Whitmore at 20, he was also 4 on my big board. So I agree. If you can get him there, that's excellent value. You make that pick. I am incredibly curious. Hopefully we do find out more in some form or fashion, whether we're talking about it or not on a Draft Deeper podcast, but hopefully in one form or another, we find out what the heck was going on behind the scenes with this fall. because all of the intel we've heard was that it was a medical fall, and there were things going on from that aspect to where Cam Whitmore drastically fell down a board. But at the same time, we've watched guys like Michael Porter Jr., who had clearly incredibly poor medicals and related to his back. Some scouts actually have come out and said it's one of the worst pre-draft medical reports they've ever seen. And that dude still went in the lottery, right? It was back end of the lottery. So, like, how did Cam Whitmore fall to the 20th overall pick? Like, I do want to know that story.
Like, think about like Steve Nash's back in 2007, right? Like, everyone's like, oh, his back is cooked. And the Suns like found a way to just like prolong his career. It's 2023.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. I understand that there are some teams with like a sketchy medical track record that maybe, like, oh, maybe we don't want to do this. Anyway, you see the Lonzo Ball report. But anyway, it's one of those things where, yeah, like I just believe in modern medicine. Like, I think that there's been enough guys that like we've seen manage to maintain their health. Like a guy like Joel Embiid, guys like late career Steve Nash. Like, if a guy's willing to take care of his body and you know what steps to take, like
that's the bingo,
you can keep him
right?
healthy.
So that
could be, yeah, that might
that's
be
the
part
point.
Of it
It's the willingness. So if teams got the impression that, you know, maybe Cam Whitmore, listen, if you're as good as he is, right? And you and I would agree that we think the skill level is higher than what people are initially saying about him. Like, I think more of the ball handling's there. I'm buying the shooting with him. I'm buying these skill aspects of his game outside of, you know, we would agree he needs to eliminate some of the tunnel vision to become a better playmaker. Like that's obvious. But outside of that, I'm buying into more of the skills package than given credit for. And I just don't think you get to that point given the type of player that he is, and you don't care about the game of basketball, right? Like there are very clear circumstances where that has actually been the opposite. There are people who we have questions about, even in today's NBA, but those cases, right, like they're few and far between, Maxwell. Like, we really just don't see too many of those things ultimately come to light. At the end of the day, these guys usually figure their bodies out. They usually figure out how to take care of themselves, and they're usually committed to doing the work to actually get to their second, third, fourth contracts and ultimately help teams win games. Like, right, like the horror stories are such a small fraction of the players that actually come into the NBA, to where I find it hard to believe to buy into that type of scenario with a guy as talented as Cam Whitmore and let that fear of failure, let that skyrocket him outside of the top 20, outside of the top lottery, and ultimately down to the 20th overall pick. So yeah, I'm skeptical of that whole situation as well. But nevertheless, I agree with you about the value. I have one question for you about how the Houston Rockets, though, are building out this roster. Maybe these concerns are going to be alleviated with what they do in free agency. Maybe they bring in some veterans there. Maybe they make some trades to bring in some veterans. I think this team needs an injection of creativity past Amen Thompson and Alperen Şengün. And maybe even throwing Amen Thompson into some of the issues. And I'm more looking the way of Şengün as the player who, in my opinion, is the most creative on that roster. But what I mean by that is, we know Amen Thompson is a wildly creative passer with the ball in his hands. When he gets downhill, he can find something when others can't see it. I love that factor about him. But when Amen Thompson gets downhill, there will be ways where defenses crowd the paint and essentially make him pass the ball out. So that's one decision where the defense can almost predetermine, in a sense, the outcome of that specific drive, right? The ball gets swung out. If it's going to Jabari Smith, well, Jabari Smith's not going to put the ball on the deck. Jabari Smith is probably going to shoot it, or he's going to swing it back around. Jalen Green, guess what Jalen Green's doing? Jalen Green is most likely not even driving to the basket. A lot of the times he wants to dance with the ball and ultimately shoot it from the perimeter. Cam Whitmore, we already know Cam Whitmore's not going to make a lot of high-level decisions off the bounce. He's probably going to catch and look to drive to the basket. There's just, the more I look around this roster, the more I don't see enough creativity to where defenses can just game plan around specific actions that each player on the floor is going to take. And all of a sudden, they make the game much narrower in terms of possible outcome. They're able to dictate more if their defense is up to a certain par. You know, it's know your personnel to the studs, and they're able to just game plan around all these different things happening, right? Alperen Şengün, to me, is the one guy I look at and I go, when he touches the ball, I don't know what he's going to do with it every time he touches the ball. He could back somebody down. He could face somebody up. He's been trying to improve his jump shot, and that's been a big thing he's working on this offseason is extending his shot out the three-point range. We know how deceptive of a passer he is and how good he is at using his eyes and throwing off defenders and making the ball go a completely other direction. Like, we know when he gets the ball, he can do something I'm not expecting to happen with it. I just don't know if I'm seeing enough of that within the rest of the roster. And when you look at a lot of these teams in the playoffs, they have guys who can put the ball on the deck and make decisions very reactive to what the defense is giving them. I don't know. Am I being a little too hard?
No, I think that's fair. Because, like, I mean, obviously, like, the point of all this is, like, you want to eventually build a team that competes for a title. And, like, having that many guys that can't do that is a little concerning. I think
the talent's
they can get better, but yeah.
Like, the overall talent on this roster is freaking ridiculous. You have, Alperen Şengün, Jalen Green, Cam Whitmore. You still have Kevin Porter Jr. You have Jabari Smith, Tari Eason. Like, you're looking at this young core and you think that by 2025, 26, this team could potentially contend for something really special in the NBA. But I think they're much further from getting to that point than some people may realize. And it's going to continue to take tinkering with this roster and legitimate skill development, I think, for this core to get there. And again, maybe I'm a little harsh. You think it's a fair point. I think it's a fair point. But that's kind of why I maybe didn't come away like running laps in circles around the fact that the Houston Rockets absolutely nailed this draft to a T. They nailed it from a value perspective. I just have questions about where this team is going from an organizational construction standpoint. That's kind of where I'm at. I don't know if you feel the same about the Rockets.
No, I agree. I think that's completely fair.
Okay, so my favorite pick in this range was Jaime Jaquez to the Heat.
It is very Miami Heat.
This is very Miami Heat. This is very much so a culture play. To me, they addressed a legitimate need on this roster, which was we saw way too many times in the playoffs. Without Tyler Hero on the floor, it was Jimmy Butler and it was Bam Adebayo, and there were few other guys on that entire roster who could actually put the ball on the deck, get to the basket, create something for himself or someone else, right? We saw Gabe Vincent go into superhero mode a few games, but ultimately he's not that same type of player, right? We know Duncan Robinson's not that guy. Max Strus. We can go on and on down the roster in terms of these role players who outperformed in certain ways, but they aren't capable of maximizing and pushing this team's ceiling forward as much. So they can raise the floor a little bit with some good performances, but they aren't pushing the ceiling forward, right? Not that I'm expecting Jaime Jaquez to become a star, but I do think what he's good at is a key ingredient that this team's missing from its other role players. And that's why I thought that they absolutely nailed this pick. This guy's going to come in. He's going to work his tail off. He's going to bring the right attitude. He's competitive as all hell. We heard all about him killing these workouts. Every single workout he was in, he was just destroying guys. And I firmly believe he's going to bring that attitude to every single game, which is exactly what the Miami Heat want. And he's going to give them a skill set that they just don't have from these other role players on the roster. So filling a need, bringing someone who plays to their culture strengths. I absolutely love this pick for them. Job well done for the Miami Heat getting Jaime Jaquez. All right. 21 through 25. Mm-hmm. So at 21 and 22, the Brooklyn Nets had back-to-back draft selections. They took Noah Clowney and Tariq Whitehead. Portland Trailblazers had another pick at 23. They got Chris Murray. The Dallas Mavericks actually traded up to 24. They were involved in another draft day trade, getting that pick from the Sacramento Kings. They drafted Olivier Maxence Prosper. And then at 25, the Detroit Pistons actually got involved in some trade shenanigans, and they ended up with that pick getting Marcus Sasser out of Houston. So Maxwell, out of that range of prospects, which one was your favorite pick?
I really liked the Omax pick in Dallas. So I like it for some of the reasons I like the Derek Lively pick. Like, this is a guy who doesn't need the ball, big, athletic, they need size, blah, blah, blah. But I think what makes Omax so intriguing here is that he's giving them more of like a perimeter-oriented defender, which is something that they could use on this team, especially since Dorian Finney-Smith has been shipped out of town. But I also think like he does have a real upside, and I think that was part of what got lost between like the combine and the day of the draft. Like, it was one of those things where it felt like he was driving up boards because everyone's like, oh well, yeah, like he did well at the combine, so like he's better than a lot of these guys, so he'll go in the first round. But like, a big worry with him was that he was this very low assist rate guy at Marquette. But a lot of that was the product of playing alongside Tyler Kolek and Oso Ighodaro, who had the ball in their hands substantially more than he did. He was stringing guys out off the dribble. He was making good passes. He was playing with his head up. And that is all like playoff guy stuff, especially when you consider that like the thing my big take with him from the combine was like just from a physical body, athletic movement perspective, he looked the most like a guy you could plug into an NBA playoff game tomorrow. If those ball skills continue to improve, and this is a guy that's taken and made more threes every single season, like you might be getting one of those forwards and wings that everybody wants on their team at 24, which is like pretty difficult to do. But even if he, again, it's the same thing with Lively pick, where like, even if he is just a pretty basic, like guy who guards the ball really well and knows how to cut and play without the ball and move off the ball on a team that is so heliocentric in terms of how they play, he's still going to be a real value add.
I would agree 100% with the Omax pick. We thought he was going to be gone by this point. We thought that he would be gone within like the top 20. That was some of the intel we were hearing. So for him to still be around there, I mean, I would have actually kind of loved for Sacramento to keep that pick. And
I thought the same thing. I was like,
So I was kind of surprised that they moved off it and let Dallas make that selection. But nevertheless, bringing in two guys, Derek Lively and Omax, who are going to immediately upgrade that defense, absolute brilliance, I agree, by the Mavericks. My favorite pick in this range, I bet you there's virtually no one who would make this pick outside of Detroit Pistons fans, but I really love the Marcus Sasser pick.
I do too. That was the other one I was thinking about here.
So if you look at this Pistons depth chart, Maxwell, I'm sorry, I don't think Killian Hayes is going to be around on this team long term. I think he's probably going to be moving on to another situation. I would be shocked if he's on this Pistons team past like maybe another full year, right? So behind that, you really don't have any other guards on this roster who can come in, handle point guard duties, and then give you what Sasser can provide you, which is outside shooting, shot creation, pick and roll passing, and then point of attack defense to me was also a big ingredient to this. So you need a third guard who can come in and mix it up defensively, especially when I can foresee matchups in which you don't want Cade Cunningham and Jaden Ivey guarding at the point of attack. So then you're looking at, well, they could look the way of Asar Thompson, who we think also has all defense potential in the NBA because of how great he is, or how great he projects to be on that side of the ball. But if he's that good on defense, you want him playing against the other team's best weight. I don't necessarily want to be pulling him to, guard another team's point guard, for example, and have him consistently working at the top of the court all the time. I want Asar Thompson being able to play on the wing or defend in space so that he can play to his strengths, right? Play passing lanes, force turnovers, get the team out in transition. Marcus Sasser is that type of hound who you do not want him guarding you when you have the ball in your hands, especially at the top of the floor, right? You actually threw out, I believe, an amazing stat during wasn't that you that threw out that stat in the draft show about his point of attack defense?
Yeah, so he is just like the most plug and play guy in this range. So Sasser made like 46% of his catch and shoot threes and forced a turnover 34% of the time when guarding the pick and roll ball.
That's the one I was
so
looking for.
A third of the time, like you're gonna turn it over when he's guarding you in a pick and roll, which is obscene. It's obscene. Like that is not. This is the kind of data and stuff that I love to track and get into. Like I don't see guys approaching that number ever. Like it is truly, truly obscene. So, he's a menace. He's very malleable because he is so good off the catch that like he doesn't really need to play with the ball. The thing I'm most intrigued in, like the big swing skill with him, because a lot of times like these senior guys, no one talks about swing skills. It's just like he catches, shoots, he plays defense, whatever. He didn't really get downhill a lot in college, but he finished better this past year. But think about how cramped the court was a lot of the times at Houston. Like they always had like a traditional big man who was usually like traditional, but still like 6'8", whatever. I do wonder if there might be more of a downhill game to him with how quick he is. So like that's the one thing that like if he can do that, then you're dealing with like a starting guard at some point.
Absolutely. And like I said, I think there's going to be situations where you can throw him into a closing lineup because you just want him on the floor defensively. So I thought that was a very valuable pick for the Pistons to make it 25. Get that third guard, get someone who you're confident is just going to be in the NBA playing a position of need for a long time versus another one of these swings or projects when you already have a number of these guys on the roster. Anyways, if you're the Pistons, and that's a point that Maxwell's made so many times on this podcast, you only have so many resources to be able to offer to these players who are, longer term projects, right? Sometimes you just need to bring in a player who can contribute in certain areas right away and still has room, like Maxwell talked about, to grow out his game and branch out into a starting role. All right, so picks 26 through 30. Ben Shepherd went to the Pacers at pick 26. Nick Smith went to the Charlotte Hornets at pick 27. Bryce Sensabaugh went to the Utah Jazz at 28. Julian Strother went to the Denver Nuggets at 29. And Kobe Brown went to the Clippers at pick 30. Maxwell, favorite pick in this range?
I have got to go with our guy Bryce going to the Utah Jazz. Okay. So if the medical is as bad as it was being made out to be, and from what I understand, it's 3 knee operations in 5 years, which is like public, like that's out there. That's what he's had. I'm already getting Keontae George, who doesn't have health questions. I'm getting Taylor Hendricks, who doesn't have health questions. I'm a competitive team. I was almost in the play-in this past year. Why am I not taking a guy like Bryce Sensabaugh at the end of the first round? This is 1,000% the times of the kind of home run swings you should be going for if you're the Utah Jazz at this stage in your development. And like we talked about too when we were doing our final mock, they are thin when it comes to guys in that 6'5" to 6'8" range. They just don't have a ton of guys that size on their roster right now. So positionally fills a bit of a need that Hendricks is someone who's more of a bigger 4. Keontae more giving him that youth injection at the guard spot. They need somebody who's roughly that size, and Sensabaugh is going to have an opening to see the floor right away if he's able to earn those minutes. And we see that DeMar DeRozan in there, like Corey Tulaba wrote about for the site. And you got to do it. You got to do it. If he's sitting there and you're a team that has not only 3 picks in this draft, but all these other picks coming down the pipe from Minnesota and these other trades, this is the kind of calculated bet that you take every single time.
I'm a tad confused as to why the Indiana Pacers didn't take a swing on him, right? Having that 26 pick. I think they could have definitely been a team to make a play for Bryce because of a need at the wing position, but they actually sort of did go in that direction. And I know that we view this player as more of a combo guard or a true 2. We don't necessarily think about him as someone who can slide up and play the 3 in different situations. But I actually think that's in the cards for Ben Shepherd. I 100% do. Ben Shepherd out of Belmont. That was my favorite pick in this range. And it could have been Maxwell's favorite selection as much as Bryce Sensabaugh's, because Maxwell was way in on Ben Shepherd far before I was. But when I came around on Ben Shepherd, I came around hard. I think this guy is, in my mind, without a doubt, should have been a top 25 pick. I could have made an argument for him going inside the top 20. At the end of the day, you just don't find guards with his size, 6'5", 6'6", decent length. He is an underrated athlete. He is one of the quicker.
He did well at the combine. He just runs weird. That's all it is. He just runs kind of funny.
But he's quick though. He's quick as a whip off the jump, and it's the type of versatility he provides in terms of his shooting. He's a comfortable spot up guy. He can shoot off the move. He wasn't the most electric finisher at the basket. That was one of his bigger concerns, but he's able to get downhill. He's able to play in certain pick and roll schemes. He is a underrated decision maker off of a live dribble. He's a guy who's going to continuously move. He's going to tire out defenders. He's going to keep defenses on their toes because of how he can rise up very quick for a shot. He can get downhill. He can make a decision. He can get to the basket. This is a guy who he just has so many awesome complementary skills to offer at that size. And on top of it, Maxwell, I'm curious about your defensive outlook with him, because we've talked so much about what he provides offensively, and he showed all of that at the combine, a big reason why he rose up draft boards. I actually think he's got a chance to guard some threes in the NBA. If you told me they could trot out a lineup with Halliburton, Nembhard, or Mathurin, and then maybe Shepard's covering some threes at times, I wouldn't be shocked if that's the direction they went, because he's not a small 6'6". Like, he's put together pretty well. And I think all of these guys get bigger in time.
Yeah. And that's the thing too, is like, he's a lot bigger than he was a year or two ago. And he's still younger for a senior too. Like, I think he's like 21 and a half. So it's not like this year,
Not
there's
like
so many
24.
guys, there's so many like 24-year-olds this year. Yeah, he's still got a runway to put some meat on his bones. I still like him best guarding younger players. I thought that was like the film I enjoyed most of him defensively, was actually kind of like guarding down the lineup. So I do feel better with, and like his wingspan's only like 6'8" or 6'9", I believe. So like, I still would feel better with him at the twos, but I think in a pinch or depending on the matchup, you could play him at the three.
Sure. And again, you also have a piece like Nembhard, who Nembhard swung up and guarded threes at times this season. Like, he was
in
their
Mathurin,
prime.
as he fills out too, could be a guy like that.
Right. And so the other point about the depth is that you look at the backcourt options like Halliburton, Nembhard, and Mathurin. We're confident they're going to be around for the long term. How long is Buddy Hield going to stick around? How long is Chris Duarte and TJ McConnell going to stick around? Like, all of a sudden, the backcourt firepower thins out pretty quickly. And right, we think that Mathurin's the long-term small forward of the future. We think that Jordan Moore is probably going to be in the cards. He's like a combo forward for them. But the backcourt depth is actually going to thin out pretty quick over the next year.
Chris Duarte is like getting kind of long in the tooth. Like, he might be retiring soon. So that's one to keep in mind. Every time he comes up, I've got to do it. We can go on to that next range.
Maxwell's going to make that joke. But yeah, I think continuing to add depth where you can with solid quality players, regardless of quote unquote log jam or how you're viewing it positionally. I just want to go and get the BPA. And in that range, you can absolutely make an argument that Shepherd was among some of those names. And I'm glad that the Pacers ultimately swung and took that pick. All right, so we're going to take one more quick break. When we come back, we are going to fly through the second round, and then we're going to get into a little bit of sicko territory, talk about some undrafted free agent fits. All right, and we are back. So moving into the second round, Maxwell, 31, James Najee to the Hornets, 32 to the Nuggets, Jalen Pickett, 33 to the Timberwolves, Leonard Miller, 34 to the Kings, Colby Jones, and 35 to the Bulls, Julian Phillips. The Bulls certainly made a good play moving into the second round and taking a guy who they thought had some upside. So Maxwell, out of that range, who was your favorite pick and why?
Got to go with our guy, Leonard Miller. I had him 14 on my board. I just think this guy's going to make it. Like, period, point blank, I cannot envision a world where 5 years from now, Leonard Miller is not playing rotation minutes in the NBA. He's too good. He plays with too high of a motor. He's too big. And guys that are just that big and play that hard and have like a modicum of skill manage to make it work. Like, I don't know. Like, think about what Paul Reed was coming out of college. And like, he's like carved out this nice little role with the 76ers. Like, look at what Leonard Miller's doing as like an 18-year-old who never played anybody good at basketball until like a year ago. Like, I just, it's incomprehensible to me. Yeah. I just cannot imagine a world where this guy fails. And I think like, if you can rebuild the shot with how good of a free throw shooter he is and some of this other stuff, it's like, you could be getting like a potential high-end starter if some of that stuff comes around. But like, again, even if it doesn't, like, it goes back to like, hey, if you think a guy's an NBA player, just take him in the second. Like, I think he is. I think he's a lot more than that, and it's befuddling to me. And Rucker had mentioned this, I believe, on a show or on Twitter, but like, there was a lot of people on Twitter like him more than people in league circles. Talk with him. That's fine. You guys don't have to like him, but at 33, you're getting the steal. And we can check back at 5 years and see who's right. And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there's the reason they don't like him as much. But just from a character and on-court perspective and a production standpoint, at 18 years old, with such little high-level experience, it made me ill to see him fall out of the first round.
So Metcalf asked a great question when we were on the stream, and he said, what's the difference between Leonard Miller and Josh Minot? My answer to that would be, I'm actually trusting Leonard Miller to scale up, especially as he continues to fill out in his career and do more of the 4-5 duties as opposed to the 4-3. Like Minot, for as much as we liked him last year in the draft, he is a unique combo forward prospect who I think he can play the 4 position, but I actually think he's an awesome defensive weapon if you're having him guard some threes and sort of play on the wing or defending in space. I don't want him scaling up and guarding some of the big men. I think Leonard Miller is actually going to be able to do that. Is he the most ideal 5 in terms of you're playing him 36 minutes, you're getting awesome rim protection? Like, no. And that no one's asking him to do that either. But I think if you want someone who is going to play that nasty 4 or 5 spot and be able to give you a lot of the production that you would want from like a backup big man, as well as getting all the intriguing and fun ball handling point forward type of upside that he also has in him, like that's the type of player I view Leonard Miller as, and why I think he adds a different type of element to this Minnesota Timberwolves team, because they don't have another guy quite like him on this roster. It's kind of either like they're big, they go really big, or even like their bigger wings like a Jaden McDaniels. Like the rest of their team is so much more focused on the perimeter. They don't have like these nasty, I'm just going to go mess everything up guys who can also run out and transition and handle the ball a little bit.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the reason like Minot needed the shot so much more than somebody like Leonard Miller does, is because of like that positional situation.
Absolutely. So my favorite pick in the range was Jalen Pickett to the Denver Nuggets at 32. Boy, it was a courageous selection to make, right? To go get a player who a lot of scouts had at best like in the 50s on their board. A lot of people even had him in like the 60s and 70s. But Jalen Pickett to me was someone who I could envision rising up boards and maybe even going inside the top 45. And the reason why I believe that is because, albeit I get it, you and I have talked plenty of times about how the production is unconventional and it is unique in different instances, but he's also one of these guys who I just trust to command the second unit. I trust his point guard instincts. I trust his feel. I trust how he can operate within himself at 6'4", over 200 pounds. He's not a pushover. He's not going to get pushed around. He can actually deal some punishment on guys. And he's just too crafty. He just figures stuff out. Right. He's awesome with pump fakes. He's awesome at getting guys up in the air off their spots. And he'll find those unique, tough windows, short windows to either get up a shot around the basket or whip the ball out to somebody else. You want to double team him when he goes to that funky little post up move? Fine. He's going to kick it out. He's going to make the right decision and find the open man every single time. Fine. You want to force the ball out of his hands? He'll go spot up. He'll nail jump shots more often than you actually think he will. He's not a terrible jump shooter. Is he a little streaky at times? Sure. But I actually trust him more than I think a lot of other people do as a jump shooter. You get him going on the move. You get him going downhill. He can make the right decisions around the basket or score at it. He's got a floater game. He has way more skill in his bag than I think people want to give him credit for, just because it might look a little different. But at the end of the day, I trust the production more often than not. He's a triple-double type guy. He falls short of guaranteed starter in the NBA because he's not the quickest guy on the floor. And that lack of burst is going to hurt him in certain situations, depending on who's guarding him on the other side of the ball. But at the same time, if he's like a third or fourth guard Maxwell and he's going up against more second units, how many other guys within those backup constructions in the opposing team are actually built to like, yeah, I'm just going to go out there and my only job is to shut down Jalen Pickett? Like, I guarantee that's not what these other teams are going to game plan and scheme around when they're trying to, figure out defensive game plans for the other team. So like, I just trust what Jalen Pickett's going to give me from a backup / spot starter perspective. And if I'm confident he's going to hang around and do that for a long time in the league, yeah, he's going to go in that like 31 to 37 to 40 range. And he's going to be, albeit not the same player, but he's going to be this year's version of Andrew Nembhard. So like, that's why I really like that pick for the Denver Nuggets. All right. 36 through 40. We had the Milwaukee Bucks get Andre Jackson Jr. The Denver Nuggets made another selection in this range off of some trades they did earlier. They got Hunter Tyson. 38, the Boston Celtics added Jordan Walsh. At 39, the Atlanta Hawks added Mo Gay. And then at 40, the Los Angeles Lakers selected Max Lewis. So I think I know who your favorite selection was. Mm-hmm. Why don't you enlighten the audience?
Yeah, it's Max Lewis. And I actually like a lot of these picks in this range. So like, I think Andre Jackson is like a clever, like, why not kind of pick. I think Tyson can fit with the Nuggets. The fact that like Walsh is the guy that the Celtics could have just taken at 25, but you get him in 4 seconds at 38 is like pretty sick. Like, I like that. Big Mo Gay guy after I interviewed him. And then Max Lewis was like 21 on my final board. So I love Max Lewis. And I think what the Lakers were able to pull off was exceptionally calculated. So they landed some really good two ways, who we'll get to in a little bit, that are both just those like, that guy could be a role player type
Yep.
players. So you get your safe guys. You just got him outside of the draft. And then with Lewis, like if the, oh, he's too raw, he turns it over too much, blah, 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 he doesn't defend as well as he'd like, doesn't come around, that's fine. You got your safe, like ready to contribute guys outside of the draft. And at 40, you're getting a guy that if he sticks, he's going to be a game changer. I love his attitude. I love how humble he is. He can pressure the rim. He finishes when he gets there, and he can shoot the cover off the ball. When he's 6'7" and he's that athletic, I understand there are some concerns here, but when a kid like that is willing to be coached, that's a guy you take in the first round and not in the second. So if he's there in the second, you just take him. So I'm all about it.
And not only those undrafted swings that, like you said, we'll get to, but also getting Jalen Hood-Schifino at 17. While I don't think he's going to light the world on fire and be like an all-rookie guy in his first year, his upside, he probably has the highest upside or up there with like 2 or 3 guys out of anyone taken outside the lottery. So you're still getting a guy who can have that long-term type ceiling, that runway like a Max Lewis. But I do think even in the short term, he's going to be able to play and he's going to be able to produce in certain aspects. I don't want to turn the keys over to him to run a team as a point guard right away in his rookie year in the NBA, but he is going to be able to get on the floor. He's going to be able to shoot it, create a little bit. And if he gets back to defending like he did in high school, I mean, there's just another one of these guys who the Lakers can walk away. They feel good about what they get in the short term. You give Max Lewis that runway to develop like you're talking about. He could be a really special player for you in a few years. I am going to talk about the Jordan Walsh pick because I loved what the Boston Celtics did, trading out of multiple spots, ending up picking up multiple second-round picks. I saw an interview with Brad Stevens talking about how they were looking forward to future draft positions. They didn't feel comfortable about the type of draft capital they had in the future, both to either select players in the second round or use in trades, right? And we're seeing that become more of a thing with teams, moving off of contracts, getting into the first round, picking up an extra draft pick in the first round. Those second round picks are valuable assets in terms of making those either on the fringe type moves or allowing you to talk yourself into making a bigger move because you might give up X, Y, and Z first round picks, but you still have these second rounders that, depending on the range they're in, you might still be able to get a player like some of these other names we're talking about, right? Like a Colby Jones at 34, or a Jalen Pickett at 32. These guys who they may be more ready than we think to come in and produce right away, and they could be role players for you, 9th, 10th, 11 men off the bench to where you're not sacrificing depth. You're able to trade away some of those picks and bring in the veteran players you want to fill out the rest of your starting lineup. So the Celtics were just looking to add more of those types of selections in general, but you're also still able to hold firm and move back to a spot to where you're getting a guy like Jordan Walsh, who if he hits, he is the perfect type of player that NBA teams want on their roster, right? 6'8", massive wingspan, built really well, still will fill out physically and add more to his frame, become stronger. And then I'm buying the ball handling ability from him. I'm buying the slashing ability. He's going to keep improving as a spot up shooter. Defensively, he's guarding virtually every position on the floor. He's active on the ball. He will make plays off the ball. He'll get steals. He'll get chase down blocks. I love the type of player that Jordan Walsh is, and I get that he has to meet a certain baseline offensively to justify playing him for X amount of minutes on the floor. But if you're confident you have the plan in place to help him develop and get to that point offensively, this is the type of swing that any smart team should take in the second round, as long as they trust the resources they have in front of them. I do trust Boston to develop Jordan Walsh in the correct way. I absolutely love that they made that pick. So that to me was that was a home run. All right. 41 through 45, the Charlotte Hornets with Amari Bailey at 41, the Tristan Vukcevic at 42 to the Washington Wizards. The Trailblazers get Ryan Rupert at 43. The San Antonio Spurs get Sidy Cissoko at 44, and the Memphis Grizzlies stop the fall. They took G.G. Jackson at 45. So Maxwell, favorite pick in this range?
Yeah, these are just like all guys I had in this range. So to me, this range is just kind of like, yep, you guys did it. I guess I'll say CD just because like it's cool that there's 2 guys from France on this team now. But no, I think CD is probably like the guy that's most interesting to me in terms of like I kind of buy the potential a little bit more than some of these other guys. I think that with City, there's just like a real competitiveness, a real nastiness to him that if he can just play a little bit more under control, because like his handle comes loose, he's way worse at the rim than you would expect. He doesn't get up that well. Fouls a lot. Like there's such a cool framework of like a great player here, right? Like this athletic guy, the shot isn't busted, like can make some smart passes from time to time, plays hard on defense. Like it just needs refinement. And for San Antonio, when you're in this position where it's like, hey, we're getting, our future franchise superstar, like I think sometimes teams can rush into building around guys like that a little too quick. Like we saw it with Anthony Davis in New Orleans, where it's like, oh, we got to go. Like we got the guy. We got to go. We got to keep him happy. And it's like sometimes the way to make him happy is to like build a long-term contender. And by bringing in another guy that's like younger than Victor, like feels like a guy that's going to play in the playoffs if it all comes together. Like this is the kind of guy you should be targeting in the second round if you're San Antonio.
So I would agree with the City pick. I absolutely adore the Spurs getting him at 44. That was tremendous value. I would have taken City in the first round, right? Mm-hmm. Like I backed off of having him too high on my board, but I think I still finished with him like 23, something like that on my final big board. So I valued his skill set. Because I want to make a different selection than you, I will say Amari Bailey at 41.
Okay.
I would have liked this pick a lot more if they didn't take Nick Smith Jr. at the end of the first round.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a chance Amari Bailey actually beats out Nick Smith for any sort of like backup guard duties. Like I think there's a legitimate chance between those two. I just think Amari Bailey's a better basketball player right now.
I was gonna say one of them does things other than put the ball in the basket and was also actually better at putting the ball in the basket too. So that was like the one comment when I sent you my final top 100. You said I think you might be regretting putting Amari Bailey that low, because I had him around like 46 or so, I believe. So
because I think there's real pathways to him actually becoming a starting guard in the NBA, or in the case of like with Charlotte, someone who has LaMelo Ball entrenched as their starting point guard, he can still be a very capable spot starter / backup. And guess what? We've seen LaMelo Ball now get hurt quite a few times with the Charlotte Hornets and miss extended stretches of games. If that's a repeated pattern in the future, you need someone to be able to step in and sort of hold the fort down while he's out for an extended stretch. And I think Amari Bailey can be that guy.
Yeah, I think I'm ultimately just not a believer in the shot. Like the volume kind of scares me. The bad free throw percentage scares me a little bit. Not like wild about the pull-up game. And then the other thing with him too is that like I think the combine performance got a little overblown, because like I know people don't stop trying in a combine game, but like a lot of his production came in garbage time. And it was just like everyone's like he had 8 assists and no turnovers, and it's like nobody was really doing anything out there. So
sure, and I can co-sign that. I would also look at the back end of his season with UCLA into the NCAA tournament. He had some real moments where he was not only making decisions with the ball in his hands as like a secondary or tertiary playmaker, but he was also spotting up away from the ball. He was knocking down corner threes. We were seeing instances where the jump shot was coming around for him. So I'm actually buying into his long-term future. Not that he's going to shock everyone out of the gates and be like this awesome, like all rookie second team type guy. Sure. Mm-hmm. But I think he's closer to being a rotational asset than I think people are giving him credit for. And that's why I thought that was a really smart pick for the Charlotte Hornets at 41. You take a swing on Nick Smith Jr. If he doesn't pan out fully to what ideally you want him to be, you still have this other guy in the wings who might even be better than him right now, or at least competitive enough to be on his level in like a training camp battle. You have another option to go to at that backup guard spot. So, all right, we will lump these two groups into one. So we'll go through these because I do want to get to you talking about some of your favorite undrafted guys. So 46, the Atlanta Hawks took Seth Lundy. 47, the Pacers took Mojave King. 48, the Clippers got Jordan Miller out of Miami. 49, the Cavaliers took Imani Bates. 50, the OKC Thunder took Keontae Johnson. At 51, the Nets took Jalen Wilson. 52, the Suns got Tamani Camara. At 53, the Timberwolves got Jalen Clark. 54, the Kings and Jalen Slauson. 55, Isaiah Wong went to the Pacers. 56, the Grizzlies took Tarek Babarovich, which I didn't even know he was a player who was in the draft pool. Congrats. I thought I had everyone in the international ranks covered, but I guess I didn't. 57, the Wizards got, the Warriors get Trace Jackson Davis because of that deal with the Wizards and the Chris Paul trade, swapping around second rounders. And then 58, the Bucks get Chris Livingston. So Maxwell, out of that range of guys, who was your favorite selection in the back end of the second round?
Yep, it's my guy Tumani Kamara. It's Tumani
Yes.
Kamara. I had him early 40s. Look, I had TJD higher on my board, so you can take that one if you wanted. It's sitting right there.
I'm gonna take that one because I wanted you to talk about Kamara, and I figured that's who you'd want to go with. For the record, mine would also be Kamara. But
so we're gonna see if there's a little bit of Kyle Kuzma in their theory is true, because like he's gonna have a chance to compete for minutes because of how thin the Suns team is. They need guys that are gonna guard and play without the ball. And that has been my working theory with Tumani Kamara this whole time. He was like very good at above the break threes off the catch. He's a very good roll man. He defends multiple positions. He knows how to help and rotate and do all the things that you want the guys around your star players to do. And his decision making is going to be kept to a minimum. And I've always said when you have creative passing flashes to that level, I'm willing to think that you can really rein things in and sharpen up, even if you're a little bit turnover prone. So I've always been a Tumani Kamara believer, but I think this fit for him in Phoenix is like just gorgeous.
I would agree. And they're going to ask him to do literally nothing but shoot the ball or finish easy plays in the half court or on the break. Like that's literally all he's going to have to do. He's not going to have to worry about anything else. If that's the case, we saw, especially in settings like Portsmouth, when he was playing with older experienced guys, we saw how productive he can be as a play finisher. So I'm also rocking out with Kamara as a top pick in the back end of the second round. But the Trace Jackson Davis fall is really interesting. We got more of the backstory as to how that happened, now that we've been X amount of hours removed from the draft. But regardless of whether it should or shouldn't have happened, it did. And we have to reflect on what the results are now, which is TJD is one of those big men that can be a great fit within that Warrior system. We've heard a lot of analysts talk about it, so we don't have to go in depth on it. But the fact that he can be that secondary playmaker, you can run offense with him. You can run offense through him in the post. He can be someone who grabs a rebound, brings the ball at the floor, and then he will give you legitimate size on the interior, someone who's not afraid to mix it up against other big men. He will go up, he will block shots, he will grab boards. This team got really small, especially now that we're looking at the Chris Paul trade. So they're going to need size and physicality somewhere from other than just Kevon Looney and Draymond Green. This is their third guy. Well, they can really look and say, well, if Jonathan Kuminga does not pan out in the way we want him to, this is our other answer in terms of adding legitimate front court depth, size, strength, toughness. We're going to go get TJD, who is one of the best big men in college basketball for 4 years running. We believe that his productivity is ultimately going to translate in some form or fashion in the NBA, and hopefully we're getting the best version of him, which is a nightly double-double machine, someone who can actually, who knows, maybe Trace Jackson Davis ends up being the long-term center of the future. Like we don't know what the Warriors will look like past next season. There could be a lot of changes made, in a few years from now, depending on how this team ages out, how competitive they are next year. We don't know all of those answers, so let's see. But I think no matter what, they got the best value on the board in the second round and getting him that low in a lot of scouts' eyes. So Maxwell, this is the part of the podcast you were waiting for. It's not the longest part of the podcast, but it is something nonetheless we can have a little fun with. Favorite undrafted free agent fit. So we got a slurry of signings after the draft was concluded. A bunch of guys got great two-way contracts. There were some Exhibit 10s handed out. We got some Summer League invites. So you can go the Exhibit 10/Summer League direction. I try to keep my list more to like who actually got two-way contracts, but favorite undrafted fits. Go ahead, just go bonkers.
You're really trying to reel me in sicko territory here. So I'll say it's Colin Castleton.
Dude, you can go as sick as you want. Just
I'm gonna
mention like a bunch of names.
Okay. I'm gonna mention one, but Colin Castleton to the Lakers is one because like he's just a guy who is like an NBA center. He just is like he can really pass the ball. He moves well, makes good decisions, finishes plays, like held opponents like under 37% at the rim while also blocking a lot of shots. And like a lot of times there's more of a trade-off there than you would expect, where it's like, oh, he blocked a lot of shots, but he also sells out a ton. So like teams actually shot pretty well at the rim against him. Like not the case with Castleton. And they got Demoy Hodge too. So just like beautiful, like getting plug and play guys. Like with Hodge, I didn't think Hodge was going to get drafted just because of his age, but worthy of a two-way, sure. So like you're getting two guys that like are ready to just play complementary roles and have played in some pretty big games and are used to the spotlight. Want to give a big shout out to the Sacramento Kings for taking my guy Jake Stevens on an Exhibit
Let's
10.
go. Yep.
I loved
Let's
it.
go.
I'd put him on a two-way.
He's going to get a two-way. I'm fully confident he's going to get one.
Better. Especially with Sacramento's fit. Like, we always talk about, like, oh, well, maybe they could draft this guy. It's a guy who's, like, big and can pass a little bit and whatever. It's like, Jake Stevens is that guy. Jake Stevens is the guy who is big and can pass. And also, hey, he knocked down, like, 45% of his threes over the last 2 seasons. And he's 7 feet tall. He's got a 7'10" wingspan. It's like I said, like, there was a real case for drafting him just because if you miss, that's not a skill set that's there every single year. So I'll throw him out there as well. And Serge Jabari Rice to Sacramento was another one where I was just like, love that. Get him another guard. I think he like is sneaky going to be a player. Like, I think there's a real shot he becomes like a role guy.
Dude, there was just no matter where he played all of last
Always
year,
wins.
whether college, Portsmouth, G League camp, combine. No matter where he was, he just absolutely killed it.
Yeah, I'm writing a lot about him in my column because like I think he's just so high feeling athletic that there's more to him than people think. But who are your guys?
So I'll throw out some. I know we co-signed the Los Angeles Lakers undrafted free agent haul. That was the best one. They got who else did they get? I think they got somebody. Oh, they got Alex Fudge too. They got Alex Fudge in. What was he? Exhibit 10 or Summer League? Which one was he?
I believe he's X10. Yep, he's Exhibit 10, and they got Damian Bond in Exhibit 10 as well.
Love it. I absolutely love the undrafted free agent haul for the Lakers. I also thought, as you mentioned, the Sacramento Kings did really well. This group does not have, in my opinion, the staying power in the NBA that the Lakers group is going to have. But if we're talking about pure upside, the Philadelphia 76ers, our Philadelphia 76ers, Ricky Council IV, Jaquavian Smith, Azuolas Tubelis. I mean, that is one hell of a two-way. All three of those guys got two-way contracts. Is there a chance all three of them are out of the NBA in 2 years? Absolutely. But if we're talking about getting guys with pure talent who have the upside to come in and actually earn guaranteed deals, I'd say there isn't a better trio out there on two ways than that group. So well done to the 76ers for at least bringing in guys who they do have legitimate chances to
can play basketball. Yeah.
They all can play basketball. Absolutely. So I really like what the Milwaukee Bucks did. I thought bringing in Jay-Z and Gortman and Amari Moore on two-way contracts was big value. You're not like the biggest Amari Moore fan in the world, but I think you do value him as someone. It's like, yeah, he is worth taking a two-way swing on.
Gortman was the guy that I like changed my tune on the most because it's just like he's 6'2", he's so long. Like you go back and watch the film and it's like I kind of buy some of this stuff. Like if the shot making gets there, like there's a reason he was considered like a 5-star. Like the dude is, I don't know. Like it's one of those things where it's like I wonder if he'd played in college and he had the same year, does he go 50 the way a guy like J.D. Davison did a year ago?
He could have, or he could have went higher because I actually think there's a world in which he's better than J.D. Davison. Like I'm actually buying Gortman's talent. I'm kind of all in on it. When you look at what the Bucks have in terms of their depth chart at the point guard spot, we know Drew Holiday is their starting point guard, but like they had brought in Goran Dragic. Like how long is Dragic going to stay around? Is Javon Carter going to stay around? You're talking to like Joe Ingles, right? If Joe Ingles is back on the team, like, and they bring like, is he kind of like your backup ball handler? Like all of a sudden this team becomes really thin on guys and you're asking Drew Holiday to play a lion's share of minutes. You're hoping that Grayson Allen can take some continued leaps as like a primary ball handler. And he's someone who you can trust to facilitate more of the offense. Like outside of running every single little thing through Giannis. And then you're also hoping that Chris Middleton's back to being his full self. You're running pretty thin on ball handlers. And like, I get that you have size defense like everywhere else, but you're going to need someone at that point guard spot who can put the ball in the basket and create some stuff downhill, provide a little juice. And like, I think Gortman has as good of a chance as any of these guys to land a guaranteed contract and really be able to bring him in on the roster. Maybe if not this year, maybe even next year, but I really like that fit. Craig Porter Jr., shout out to him getting a two-way with the Cleveland Cavaliers. Another situation, their backcourt depth gets really murky when you look past Darius Garland too, right? Like how long is Ricky Rubio going to stay around? They had Raul Neto in on a cheap deal. Like outside of those guys, again, who are you going to put the ball in the hands of? Is it like a backup point guard? So I think Craig Porter Jr. is going to earn a guaranteed contract. I thought that was a really smart signing by them. And then Armand Franklin to the Denver Nuggets on a 2-way. That was value.
Yeah, I think he's still only on an X10 if I'm not mistaken. But he was the first guy out of my top 100, and then when I saw him go to Denver, I was like, damn it, like blew it. Like that is like an ideal fit for him if he's going to make it work.
I'm going to actually look that up really quick. I had thought he got a 2-way. Maybe I'm wrong about that.
Rookie scale has it as
on an Exhibit 10. Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, you know what? I'm going to bet that he earns a 2-way somewhere.
He very well could. Mm-hmm.
He's even if he doesn't ultimately supplant someone with the Denver Nuggets, he's probably going to travel really well word of mouth, and like somebody's going to give him another chance. So I like the Armand Franklin giving him a chance. All right. So those are our favorite picks. Those are our favorite undrafted free agents from the 2023 draft. Maxwell, any final thoughts on how the draft turned out or the results of it before we'll move on, hopefully, to our next podcast in about a week and a half, which is we'll have to talk about Summer League pretty soon.
Yeah.
Everyone ready for that?
Yeah. No, I'm so happy that we got to see like so many guys just get drafted, live their dream, sign NBA contracts, especially players we've talked to. Like it took on like a new meaning for me this year, like getting to see people that like we've met on a personal level get picked and have like the one thing they've wanted to have happen in their lives happen. Like it's extremely beautiful. Stay tuned to the Substack. I've got my undrafted free agent roll call coming this week. And then it's almost no stone unturned season. So it's a great time for the sickos. You're getting your undrafted free agent roll call. You're getting no stone unturned. Like it's a great time of year if you just love being deep in the weeds.
Absolutely. And even when we get into like Summer League previews and like talking about what happened out in California and Las Vegas and Utah, like that's also sicko hour to an extent, because I know a lot of the top guys are going to play, but the majority of those games, those top guys, they really only play like 1 or 2 games out there, maybe even like 3. Sometimes you get the occasional rare guy who ends up playing like the whole slate of 4+ games, but generally those guys only stick around for a few games. And we're talking about a lot of guys in the weeds making positive impressions on teams and ultimately earning, better quality jobs in the league. So I'm sure we'll have plenty of that covered there as well. But listen, thank you so much, everyone out there, for listening to this episode of Draft Deeper Podcast on No Ceilings NBA. Make sure you are tuned in and subscribe to the No Ceilings NBA podcast feed wherever you get your podcast. Make sure you're following No Ceilings NBA on Twitter at No Ceilings NBA. Make sure you're also subscribed to the Substack, NoCeilingsNBA.com. Maxwell just laid out all of his awesome content he's going to have coming out. By the time you listen to this podcast, I will have some written discussion on some of my favorite picks that were made in this draft. I think we went over a good amount of them on this podcast, but there might be some additional context you didn't get on the pod here. Make sure you go check out that written piece. And I can't wait to do more writing in general, talking about how some of these guys are actually going to fit on their respective NBA rosters, and looking forward to how other free agency moves might possibly impact what we're looking at for next year and beyond with some of these young cores and into the 2024 draft. So stay tuned to all of our coverage on No Ceilings NBA. But until then, thank you all so much for listening, and I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your week.